he had something come up, and then we're a member short. So I think this is probably us. Let me quick grab my pens.
We are off mute and we are recording right now.
It's only about it.
Is he on?
I call this meeting of the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Commission Committee to order. And that's mouthful. I'm John McGlennon. I chair the TSDAC and serve as a representative of the Virginia Association of Counties. My action is a member of the James City County Board of Supervisors. Cindy.
Good morning, Cindy Mester. My connections, the City of Falls Church, who's a member of VML and honored to serve representing VML.
Hey.
Vice Chair, I guess.
Yes.
Should throw that in.
Good morning, I'm Kate Mattice. I'm with the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. I'm representing the Virginia Transit Association.
Good morning, Noelle Pinkard with Hampton Roads Transit, representing DTA as well.
Good morning, Paula Malister with the CSPDC and Bright Transit, representing DRPT.
Okay. And I'm Maria Zimmerman. I'm the director of the Department of Rail and Public Transportation.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Alan Fye, the deputy director at DRPT.
Good morning, I'm Evan Tootin. I'm a statewide transit planner at DRPT.
Tiffany Dubinsky, director of transit planning with DRPT.
Grant Sparks, director of statewide transit programs, DRPT.
Emily Horn.
Thank you all very much. Today we are going to start off with a safety briefing. I know that this is something we've had the last several times, but it is important for everybody to know exactly how to address the situation which might arise.
All right,
Alan.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So for folks in the building, we are at 600 East Main Street on the 21st floor. If there are any type of medical emergencies, we do have AED defibrillators and first aid kits stationed throughout, and folks will be able to grab those if we have need for those. We also have fire extinguishers available as well. If there is a need to evacuate the building in case of an incident or weather or fire alarm, please follow folks from DRPT out of here, and we will direct you to one of the two different stairwells to lead out to the evacuation point. The evacuation point is at the corner of 6th and Gray Street, about 2 blocks from here. We will make sure that everybody gets out of here safely and make sure that the building is clear and we have clear instructions of when we can return. So with that, Mr. Chair, turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Alan. We normally adopt minutes at this point, but we were on a relatively short time frame since our last meeting on May 12th, and we will have minutes available at our July meeting and adopt those along with the June meeting minutes. So we will move on from that point, and I'll turn it over to Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll also mention just on the minutes for those who are online, we do always have these sessions recorded and available and archived on our website. So if you missed the last meeting, please feel free to view that recording to hear what was discussed. But again, just want to welcome everybody to DRPT and to thank you for your continued time and involvement. I know a lot of you have been not just in these meetings over the last few months and the time and commitment that that represents, but doing a lot of work between meetings to also be reaching out to stakeholders and your peers and others to get input. And so thank you. Thank you for those who are watching for your time and involvement as well. At the last TSDAC meeting, we had a really great conversation about the current TRIP program, the Transit Ridership Incentive Program, and how it will be changing as a result of HB 200 that passed earlier this year by the General Assembly. So we look forward to sharing some ideas with you in just a little bit about this program and some of the proposed ways to adjust it to address mobility needs across the Commonwealth. Also, just want to note, given these changes, one of the things we're looking to do is we can continue to kind of get more information and raise awareness about this program. And so we don't have to kind of take everything in one bite here over the next couple of months in a rushed way, but really kind of see what applications come in next year. We can continue working with TSDAC to look at ways that we can strengthen and improve that program going forward. And for the merit operating program, we've been really pleased and grateful for how TSDAC and our transit partners have engaged in this process to date. I want to especially thank the Virginia Transit Association, which made space at their conference recently for a number of sessions and workshops and conversations about merit operating. And so really, I think through that and through a series of cohort workshops that you'll hear about today, our staff have, I think, touched base with pretty much every transit agency across the Commonwealth, not just once, but multiple times, and with folks to get that input. And agency participation in these workshops has really been outstanding. And so again, we thank folks who've been involved in this process. Through a lot of this extensive outreach and education, it's been great. I think we've mostly heard really positive responses. We've certainly been getting questions too of like, tell us a little bit more, what does this mean and what are the implications and what could this look like going forward? And so we continue to welcome that dialogue. We do want this to be a really transparent process. We, fully anticipate as a statewide agency, we may not be able to make every agency 100% satisfied, but our goal as a state agency is working with TSDAC to make sure that we have a recommendation that's going to work for the majority of agencies, that we have a transparent process, that we have that open process. So we continue to welcome feedback, positive and negative, questions that folks have, and that remain. But our goals remain pretty much unchanged in this process, that ultimately we want to have a formula that is more predictable and reliable. And so we should be looking to really kind of lock in metrics where we can to provide that stability and predictability. We recognize the goals of transit agencies are different in different parts of the state and different size agencies. And so we don't want to have a one size fits all approach, but we really do want to have something that can be responsive to that change. And I think the other thing I just mentioned before I wrap up here, because we have a very full agenda, is I just like to remind folks, since we talk in acronyms a lot, the staff here has been doing so much work between these meetings to analyze the data, to crunch the numbers, to do all this work. And when we step back, again, the program isn't just merit, it's actually making efficient and responsible investments in transit. And I think the name, not the acronym, actually does kind of say it all of what we're trying to do to really elevate and ensure we're rewarding good performance. So with that, again, thanks everybody for being here and look forward to digging into another meaty discussion.
Great. Thank you very much, Director Zimmerman. And of course, it is important to note that we've had some really robust discussions in the last couple of meetings, and that in between those meetings, there's been a tremendous amount of outreach by staff working with the agencies. And I know a lot of folks have had the opportunity to hear about the program, learn more, ask any clarifying questions, or raise any objections or concerns that they might have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Grant to do a recap and give us some sense of the feedback that he's been receiving, that the staff has been receiving.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. So yes, the last TSDAC meeting on May 12th, that was only 3 weeks ago. A lot has happened since the last meeting. So we first wanted to just recap what we discussed at the last meeting, and then also give you guys an overview of some of the feedback since that last meeting. And then we'll kind of dive into the content for today. So just as a recap here, we reviewed input with you all from the round one of the cohort workshops that we had back in, I think it was either early May or late April. And so we provided that overview of that feedback to you all. We then spent a good portion of the beginning of the meeting talking about the sizing metric weights for each of the cohorts. And what's shown here on the table on the screen are the recommended weights that we brought to you all at the last meeting. So I won't read them, but generally speaking, you can kind of see that the revenue hours and revenue miles, the weighting for those two data points are consistent across all three cohorts. What changes is basically the operating cost weight and the ridership weight as you kind of go through each of the three cohorts. So again, broadly speaking, as you become more rural, cost becomes a little bit more important, ridership becomes less important. And then on the other end of the spectrum, as you become larger, ridership becomes more important. Less. We talked a lot about that. That was again the beginning portion of the last meeting. We then pivoted to talk about the Performance and Stability Fund and put a little bit more detail as to what we were thinking with that fund. We actually brought forward 2 recommendations to you all, how that Performance and Stability Fund would be framed. We felt like it was very important to get that framework in place before we started to actually run a bunch of analyses. So those are the 2 bullet points at the bottom of those recommendations. Were to cohort the Performance and Stability Fund revenues using the same cohorting percentages that were identified for the larger pot of operating funds. So again, that's 81% for large urban, 12% for small urban, and 7% for rural. So we wanted to be consistent there. And then also we talked about allowing agencies to exceed their 30% cap under the performance funding. And so we talked about, how and why we brought that recommendation forward. The overarching theme there was that we wanted every transit agency in Virginia to be able to access performance funding, and we want to incentivize every agency in Virginia to perform well. So we felt like that was very important, and we brought that recommendation to you. And then, sorry, just one bullet point here, not probably deserves more, but we also then talked about the TRIP program, of course, and Evan kind of led that discussion and some of the staff recommendations for eligibility requirements for each of those TRIP subcategories. So that was just high-level overview of the last meeting. The week after the last TSDAC meeting, we then held cohort workshops with our rural and small transit providers, both on May 18th. So first, just to recap the rural cohort workshop, there was good attendance. We had 14 of 19 rural transit agencies represented, 23 total transit agency staff on that workshop. We did not hear any concerning questions or any concerning feedback. As Maria mentioned earlier, we got some clarifying questions just on what the concept was that was brought forward and how it would really work. And that's kind of a theme with all of our feedback. It's a lot of clarifying questions from everyone, which makes sense since there are some new concepts here with the proposal. But again, nothing concerning. And then we did the same interactive polling that we did with you all with the cohort workshops.
Ask if anybody watching online would please mute.
And so we did that interactive polling with the rural transit agencies that participated in this cohort workshop. And of note here, there was a preference of using cost efficiency and cost effectiveness measures over productivity measures. So remember, there's that table, and we'll actually show you here in a few slides. There's the table of all the different measures that we could basically use in our Performance and Stability Fund. And some of them are cost efficiency and cost effectiveness related. So that's cost per passenger, cost per hour, cost per mile. But then there's productivity measures as well, which is the passengers per hour. So those are the points that we have available to use for whole cohort. And again, they felt strongly that cost efficiency and cost effectiveness should be considered before. Later that day, we had a small urban cohort workshop. So 7 of 9 small urban transit agencies were represented at that workshop for a total of 10 transit agency staff. Very few questions here as well. Again, no concerns were raised about the recommendations that were being brought forward. But the questions were clarifying questions. That interactive polling that we did with this group, it was actually had the same results as our rural workshop. They also prefer using cost efficiency and cost cost effectiveness measures over. Put a little pin in that because that's a little contradictory to what we heard at the VTA conference. So, speaking of which, the day after those two cohort workshops, we then went up to Fredericksburg for the VTA conference, which was great. Great attendance there. I think it was the second largest VTA conference in the history of the association. And at that conference, we facilitated 2 sessions on the merit operating and trip programs and some of the recommendations that we've been looking at with you all. And we had 1 session on the first day and 1 session on the second day, so that if folks could, had a conflict on one day, then hopefully they could have the opportunity to attend on the second day. But it was the same content presented at both sessions. And both were actually very well attended. We were very pleased with the turnout at those sessions. I will say that most of the attendees were large or small urban transit agency staff or consultants, of course, that were at the conference. We received a lot of good questions at both sessions. So some of those questions that kind of stood out to us, one was raised about the binary nature of the performance funding. And how DRPT will continue to incentivize agencies that are consistently good performers. So the basis behind those questions, first of all, the binary nature kind of gets into, like, for performance funding, as you might recall, you either get it or you don't. There's a threshold that we set, and if an agency gets above the threshold, then they would get performance funding, but if they're below the threshold, then they don't. And so I think the question here was, like, what if an agency misses the threshold by 0.0001? And I think the reaction here was that we have to set a cutoff at some point. So if we make an exception there, then, like, it just kind of defers that decision to, like, somebody's going to be the last one out, right, for funding. So we also talked a little bit about, like, well, folks who are within, a few percentile points of that threshold, could they potentially get less performance funding than everyone that hits the performance target? And that just gets more complicated. I mean, sure, that's a possibility, but as we're thinking it through, I think the binary nature of the proposal here, while it's not perfect, it is incredibly clear. We have a number that we set, and you either hit that number, exceed it, or you don't. And so that's the number or the concept, I guess, that we're comfortable with. And then on the incentivizing agencies that are consistent, good performers, this was a really good comment because we do have some consistently good performers. It doesn't matter how you set the target for funding. Certain agencies will likely always hit that target unless something drastically changes with their service footprint. And so the basis behind that question was, for those agencies, how do we continue to push them to strive for even better performance than what they have currently? And that's, a big consideration here. The current formula, it focuses more on trends, so up and down. Doesn't matter if that trend, that the actual data is good or bad. It's just, are you up or are you down? We are breaking away from that model in this proposal and actually saying, are you good or bad? That's the decision point as to whether you get performance funding. And so by choosing that, you do find yourself in an issue of there will be good performers that will likely always be good performers. And you can't really incentivize, or maybe there's some stuff we haven't thought about, pushing them even further. Even though they're a great performer, how do they become, like, the best performer in the country, like that type of stuff. So that was a very good comment, because I think that is something that we want to think about as this proposal evolves, is to how to push those agencies even further than our good performers. We also got questions about the performance data that we're proposing to use to reward agencies. And this one, I think we talked about maybe a couple meetings ago. Population was the big one that came up a couple times. How or has DRPT thought about incorporating service area population somehow into the formula? And the response to that was yes, we have talked about it. It's just challenging because we don't have service area population per agency. We don't have that data set right now. There are also a bunch of transit agencies in Virginia that overlap in service. So do you count the same person twice? There's all sorts of nuances to including population. I think it's a good one, potentially. FTA for federal funding incorporates population in a few different areas. So it's definitely something that we want to take a very hard look at. But for the purposes of this review, we did not feel like we had the time to collect any new data. But we will absolutely be looking at how to incorporate population in the study that we're doing in parallel to this that really looks at other forms of data to use as part of our operation. So really good questions there. Again, no significant concerns with the recommendations that were presented at the BTA conference. We did not hear anybody say that they were totally against the recommendations in those sessions. We did an interactive polling. We had to go offline for one of them. The technology was not cooperating in the convention center, but it's okay. We still were able to do some interactive polling, and we asked agencies, you know, what type of agency do you represent, whether it's rural, small, or large. And generally speaking, the results showed that urban agencies, so both small and large urban agencies, had a preference on using those productivity measures over cost efficiency and cost effectiveness measures. So that contradicts what I showed you on the small urban workshop. And yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit more about that in our recommendations for what measures to use for small urban. That was the outreach feedback. We also did just want to circle back to the timeline and schedule here. Nothing has changed on this slide other than that green halo. Has shifted forward one month, so we are now obviously in June. We are nearing the finish line here. We have one more meeting this year, which will be on July 7th. Thankfully, we have an extra week built in between this meeting and that meeting. But yeah, this just shows kind of where we are on the timeline. And then this is also the outreach schedule. Did want to make a quick note that we removed the trip peer exchange from this outreach schedule. We do still intend on doing that peer exchange effort, but we did not feel like we wanted to, I guess, incorporate it as part of the TSDAC review effort going on. We still are going to do it. I think probably later this calendar year. We're still trying to figure out the details there, but we did take that out of this slide. So that is the one change from the last meeting. So I guess before I turn it over to Evan, any questions or comments?
I have one, if I may.
Sure.
Good morning to everyone. Let's talk just a minute. I think just a minute, make sure I understand this performance fund situation. Under our current procedures, the support that the state provides to any given system cannot exceed 30% of its operating budget. Is that correct?
Operating, yes, with the one nuance there, it's 30% of the previously audited expenses. So it's not looking forward at budgets, it's looking backward at expenses. But yes, that is correct.
Okay. And we now are going to permit those who qualify for it to get in excess of 30% if achieving the performance bonus, if you would, takes it above that number, correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
Yeah, which seems appropriate to me. Now, help me understand. You make we've made several references to stability fund. I think I understand the performance aspect of it, but I don't think I understand the stability part of it. So what's that?
So if I may, Dr. Smoot, we are later in the agenda going to dig deep into that question and that topic. So if you would be all right with it, if we could kind of pause until we get to that. But the short answer is the stability fund would be once kind of the agency has gone through the formula process. If there was something really significant that happened to that agency and it wasn't accounted for within the formula, there's the potential to be able to use some of the Performance and Stability Fund to support that agency through that issue. But we do have a few slides on the deck that will have a deeper conversation on what that is and what we're thinking and how folks feel about that.
Sure, thank you, and I'm fine with waiting. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to the DRPT staff for the online as well as doing 2 full sessions. And I know they were full sessions because I saw they were full sessions at VTA to answer questions. You know, the fact that you had a lot of clarifying questions, I hope that gets to a place where folks are feeling more comfortable, not even with the changes, but just understanding any of this, right? So the fact that you guys have been taking the time to sort of listen and hear and understand, even if there are things that don't find their way into the policy, but in the way that you as an agency work with our localities and work with our transit systems. So I want to thank you for the time that you guys have taken for all of that in the last couple months. So that's just a thank you, because I know it's not insignificant. So.
That's a good point. Anybody else have questions? If not, I'd like to just get a little bit more discussion. Grant, you used the terms at one point, good performers and bad performers. I'm a little surprised there wasn't pushback on that concept, just because I guess I need to understand a little bit better what establishes the line, and then how do we view an agency that is moving toward the line from a lower point?
Yeah, and we will certainly get into a lot of those discussions and details here with our recommendations on that.
Okay.
Generally speaking, though, I will say that how do you define good performance just broadly across the Commonwealth? That's really hard to say or to just like answer, I guess. Once you're in the cohorts, that's a little bit easier because it's not a one size fits all. We are defining good performance based on the area type. And so that becomes, and that's what we have spent a lot of time on since the last meeting was how do we define good performance?
Okay.
And we don't want to say bad performance necessarily. I think we try to tend on the positive side. We just want to focus on being better performing because every agency we understand is different and the purpose of transit is different in different communities. And so just by seeing a number in a table does not always tell the full story of that agency. They could be, having certain metrics because that's how they're designed to operate. That they are not looking at certain numbers on the screen, that they're just trying to get people from, point A to point B as best as they can. So.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I would just, if I could, Mr. Chair, I would just add to that. I mean, I do think when we think about good performance, we are looking though at some things again as a state and kind of how do you compare with your peers, right? Like the ridership growth that you're seeing, the efficiency of the service that you're providing. Are you improving customer satisfaction? There are things that I think like we see agencies, for the agency itself, good performance oftentimes is coming at a cost for them, right? Like they're making trade-offs, they're raising local revenues, they're training staff in different ways, they're investing in new technologies. And so we want to support that. And again, we're really trying to make sure that as Commonwealth, Virginians are getting the best quality transit service, that we are meeting as many customers as possible, and we're able to do that in a cost-effective way.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't want it to be like, it's so squishy that we don't know. Like, I think we know, and we are looking in the performance thing of what are those metrics that give us some of that.
I think I'm just more concerned about making sure that we are talking about it in terms of, rewarding excellence in performance as opposed to identifying good and bad.
Right. No, very fair.
Okay. Thank you for those comments. I will turn it over to Evan for.
Thank you, Grant. Good morning, everyone. Pivot to the Transit Ridership Incentive Program. That is also an acronym. This presentation, the policy suggestions are a little more refined, also focus on the feedback we received at PTA. This slide is the policy recommendations broken out into the categories, similar to how it's been presented in the merit policy recommendations. Doing the program framework, and then I'll call out the zero and reduced fare, and examining ongoing support for system-wide zero fare efforts. We're committing to continue to look at that once we have an established policy that we can work with for this upcoming grant round. So the first recommendation we have is about applicant eligibility. The proposal we have is to add other local governments, also calling out tribes with federal or state recognition as eligible applicants, but only for projects with a nexus with public transportation, which we support. Next, I'll get into the 4 categories. The first one is trip regional connectivity. Sorry if this is a little dry. I plan to just read the policy recommendations verbatim. So trip regional connectivity, the enabling legislation says it's for encouraging the identification and establishment of routes of regional significance. What we heard at VTA and in the cohort workshops was people like that we support program eligibility for urban and rural providers. Also the recognition that there's varied regional priorities and different operating formula or operating setups. This program was more popular among urban agencies, which makes sense because it was previously ineligible for some rural applicants. And then the always true desire for stable long-term funding. So our recommendation for routes of regional significance is to define it as a public transit routes or service areas that address regional travel needs as described in a plan or study at the regional level. And these eligible projects are those that identify, establish, or improve routes of regional significance, including capital projects such as the establishment of bus-only lanes, implementation of integrated fare collection or enhanced passenger amenities, and operating projects such as enhancements to service frequencies or expansions to areas served. Next, trip zero and reduced fare for supporting the establishment of programs to reduce the impact of fares on low-income individuals. We've heard general agreement that zero and reduced fare programs were the best out of all these trip categories in incentivizing transit ridership. The rural cohort found that zero and reduced fare programs were more essential to their operations than the urban cohort. Also noted, we heard a diverse array of local, regional, public, and private sources support zero and reduced fare programs in addition to the TRIP program. There's a request for additional state assistance for fare-free transit systems and to improve support for rural agencies considering transitioning to fare-free service, which we're committing to further examination. This recommendation. So eligible projects for trip zero and reduced fare include the same thing you've heard previously, the provision of subsidized or fully free passes to low income or other transit dependent populations, the elimination of fares on high capacity corridors or establishing zero fare zones, the deployment of an entirely zero fare system, and fare policy planning. Next, the exciting new category, trip enhanced mobility innovation to encourage innovative approaches to micromobility, paratransit, and other specialized transportation. Since this was a new program concept, people scored it as less essential, but there's definitely a lot of interest in this. There were questions about it, mostly about restricted eligibility, microtransit services. So our proposal for eligible projects under this category are innovative approaches to micromobility, including capital or operating projects that improve first or last mile connections to public transportation. So ensuring that connection with our core function as an agency. And also innovative approaches to specialized transportation, which can include capital or operating projects, including software, and can improve the coordination of specialized or other human service transportation services, and other innovative approaches to supporting the mobility of older adults, people with disabilities, or other groups with special transportation needs. Finally, trip passenger amenities and safety for supporting local, regional, and state entities and improving the accessibility and safety of transit bus passenger facilities. We heard this is the most essential trip category, but most of the projects eligible under this category are also eligible under Merit Capital. Because eligible projects, which we recommend, include improving or adding bus stops, improving other bus passenger facilities, doing bus stop or passenger facility planning, and also procuring public safety equipment, planning. That conclusion is this policy decision slide again, showing the 3 changes. And I think my updated policy for zero and reduced fare did not include, no, it does. Low income or other transit dependent populations. I'm sorry, that was. So that's it for TRIP. That's our recommendation. Any initial comments at this phase?
So just a question. So it's, again, thanks for all the great work on this and hearing from folks in the industry. A lot of these are capital, but there's a number of these elements that I know that focus on operating and supporting funding for operating. And so in the approach, is there a duration or a consistent duration at which operating would be provided? Is this something that somebody would apply? So I think of your regional routes. I think I saw what regional routes and enhanced mobility as well as the zero and reduced fare, but I know that's sort of the bigger one.
Yeah.
Is it something that it's in perpetuity? Is it they come back every so many years? I'm just, for good or for bad, I come back to our commuter choice world, which is we do provide funding for operating, but somebody needs to come back and reapply and demonstrate they're doing stuff. That's kind of work for us. So I'm a little biased in that space. But how in these, when it's capital, you buy a thing, operating is longer. How do you plan on approaching the operating elements of the TRIP program?
That's definitely been a trick with this program thus far, is figuring out the difference between capital and operating expenses. Previously, we had the step downs that were very rigid. It assumed you're only doing capital, only operating. It's definitely something we have to think about and develop further. But I assume it'll be something similar to our established program.
I don't know what that was.
Yeah, I mean, I think you should provide a little more detail maybe of, currently there is a step down that's in it. We talked about that before. For instance, for the zero fare, the first year we provide 80% of the funding. The second year it's 60% of the funding. The third year it's 30% of the funding. And then there's a commitment to continue it the fourth year with zero funding, but you're showing that local support for that. So that could be the model that we continue with this. We did hear from some transit agencies that wanted to be able to kind of come back in because they had been funded before or would like to have that extended. We're not yet proposing to do that because we feel like we need more discussion. We need to kind of consider what would be the impacts of it now that we also have more things that are eligible for the TRIP program. We could use up all of the TRIP funding just in funding a couple of zero fare programs, right? So we're not proposing to have this be open operating funding for all time. I think we do want to keep that time constraint, but they have
And that's for all elements, not just fare free, but all of them. There'd be a time constraint for operating.
That's what we have been doing on the operating. That they've had.
That's what's helpful to know. So when somebody applies, it is with it's not in perpetuity.
I'll say something. So yeah, and there's just things like there might be a different burn rate of the funding. You probably see this in commuter choice, they may have applied for a certain amount and it's going faster or slower than they predicted. What is a year, so it might take more than a year. So it's just these things like how fast are they spending it? Did expenses go up since they applied? And so is it going to make a year or things like that? Because we have the step down that says, okay, you can use so much this year, but do they start right on July 1st or, when are they starting? When is the end date? So there's just things like that to think about, the timing as well of the, like say, operating funding, because it can be.
And it sounds like this would also be a good thing for us to come back in July with what is the proposal in terms of the timelines around.
Yeah, because I do think, if I could sort of follow up, I do think there's an interesting conversation of whether maybe it's not a step down, but it's actually just a lower percent. I mean, I think it's a worthwhile conversation because it's so different than capital. And again, likewise, I heard the same as you do, where there's obviously a lot of interest in the state support for zero fare. It may not be the exact same model that you've had, knowing that this is not, maybe not this year, but we're talking in future. I think that's a worthwhile conversation, what that may look like, and understanding both, the decisions that may affect how far we can spread the money. But maybe there's a different than a step down. Maybe there's just a flat percent. I don't know. I mean, I think there's just an interesting conversation. The other thing, I just to finish, I love the fact the passenger amenities. We have a number of localities, and maybe I'll just steal Ms. Mester's comment.
No.
We have a number of localities that don't run systems, but they have transit. And I can imagine that's actually the case in a number of different places. So the fact that a local government can apply to do improved bus stops, I think is fantastic. And I think that because in many instances, the transit system has no role in that bus stop, right? And so the fact you actually might have those type of passenger amenities and apply for those passenger amenities is actually going to help the customer experience, even if they may not have traditionally been a DRPT merit. So yes, they could apply for merit, but in this case, you actually have a locality might be applied for trip that would not have normally been a merit. So I just want to say thank you, Ms. Murray, if I'm still here, because I'm excited by that.
I am too. I had something else, so thank you.
Maria?
Concur with that. I guess for
Maria?
clarification.
Dr. Smoot, hold on for just a minute.
Thank you. Let me reflect on what I think I just heard, which I liked. It has always seemed to me that the local sponsor or the regional, whatever it is, who actually, quote, owns the transit agency, have some financial skin in the game when it comes to reduced or free fare. And in other words, that taking the view that there's never going to be enough of anything that's free, the more people you can have contributing to it, the more you may be able to do. And it seems that is where this reduced and free fare program is. I think you said that it's number one, it only lasts for several years, and then the sponsors of the system are expected to pick it all up. Is that correct?
That's how it currently works. Yes, Dr. Smoot.
And would that be it continuing in this iteration of it?
Today, we do not have a proposal to change that. I think given this discussion, that will be the focus when we meet in July, is to talk about the timeline approach for this. But I think I can say with confidence, we cannot with any of this just kind of keep it forever flowing without some parameters around that, because we.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And, I think one thing, you'll probably know the answer to this. I don't. But I do know that in some cases, the employer reimburses the employee for transportation costs, particularly in the more urban areas. Are we sure that we're just not really, what we're trying to assist the employees, that we're not in essence assisting the employer?
I'm not 100% sure that I'm following that, Dr. Smoot, but if the question is for those programs where it's employer provided transit benefits, would this be looping back to that? I think it is distinct in that there still is a subsidy that's going on there where you would have to show as the employee, yes, I have an expense that you are compensating for. If transit is free, you wouldn't be getting an employer transit benefit for that. But
right,
I might be.
But in that case, it might be the employer, not the employee, who is the beneficiary of this program. If the employer is reimbursing employees for travel expense, then it would be the employer who would not have to make a reimbursement, and they are the financial beneficiary of the program.
Yeah.
Could be. And I don't know if there's a way to deal with this. I'm not suggesting necessarily that there is, but I do know that in some of the particular more urban areas, that some employers do reimburse travel costs to employees. travel and parking.
And when, I mean, up in Northern Virginia, I know there's smart benefits and, folks can use, the metro, possibly even the local systems that charge fares and get, I think it's tax-free contributions to their smart benefit accounts that can help pay for transit fares. But I think my understanding, and I don't have any data to support this, so take this with a grain of salt, but I think those are usually white collar workers that are allowed to tap into those smart, I mean, not allowed to, but generally speaking, those are more white collar benefits,
Okay.
not dependent riders that get offered those types of incentives from their employer. So I think you do bring up a very valid point, Dr. Smoot, but I think that is something to keep in mind, is that the employer that is benefiting is likely those of white collar workers, not those transit dependent.
Okay. Well, thank you. And, I don't know either. And I think you're right. Just kind of keep it in mind, keep it in the back of your head as we work our way through this and see what's happening. But I'm fine with what we're doing here.
Vice Chair Master.
Thank you. I'm gonna end with my initial questions because I want to comment on some good conversation. Thank you, Kate, for talking about localities, because I think that is a big plus, because I obviously don't run WMATA, but I benefit from WMATA, but we have to provide the bus shelters. So we don't have a shelter at every flag yet. To the discussion that Dr. Smoot brought up, I think one, skin in the game is really important. So I don't think it should ever be zero for us localities. I do think it needs to be predictable and fair. And I think that's partly because we always say we're using our local dollar to leverage state and federal. I think it's also then fair to reverse that argument that the state's leveraging their money. The other point that Dr. Smoot brought up, I think, is a pretty important philosophical intention of this program, because while it might financially benefit the employer, it is benefiting Commonwealth as a whole if we increase transit, reduce congestion, environment, blah, 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 blah. So I still, and who's transit dependent, I wouldn't want to have a negative unintended consequence. So I think I probably lean on my initial reaction more to here if maybe in the low fare, the employer is getting a benefit because there's other expenses they're putting in, right? Because they're going to leverage. So that's just an initial thought. Then to my starting question, I think some of it may have been clarified because I wanted to know, like, what is TSDAC acting on or not acting on today? Because coming back in July with answering some of these questions and a proposal would help me feel more comfortable before I put a checkbox on slide 19 of adopting recommendations, but I wasn't sure what DRPT's expectation was of us today. And Evan has a slide up 19 that has status, and right now there's no check mark. So that was sort of the clarifying question I wanted to make sure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, on the transit benefits, what we found in Northern Virginia is that the systems that do rely on transit benefits are not the ones that are coming in to be looking at fare free. And one of the things I know on the eligible projects is the ability to do zero fare zones. So we've actually found the use, and just as Grant's comments, transit benefits, especially for a number of our systems, are commuter benefits. Truly, that's what they are. And so the commuter routes are one. So we have two of the systems that serve the Northern Virginia area in particular, that they have fares required on their commuter routes, and they have decided in their local routes are fare free specifically to get that. So again, there is a conscious decision with our localities. We do have some systems that are fare free, but we have other ones that are all fare. We have other ones that are hybrid. So the decisions that are actually being made at the localities are reflecting the desire to keep passengers who are getting their fares paid from somebody else. So there's actually a lot of thought put into that. And so the applying to DRPT is already mindful of that. And to date, my understanding is that the systems that are applying are not applying to lose those precious transit benefits, but actually a smaller segment or a zone, if not their own small local routes. So that's just getting back to Dr. Smoot's, that's actually it is an important thought process, whether you'd even want to apply for this. Because in fact, one of the big, WMATA does rely, VRE relies on those transit benefits. Those are very precious revenues. And so when there's conversations about fare free in Northern Virginia, that is always a big part of it. And so that is not lost on those systems when they would look to apply for partial all system fare free here in DRPT. Super nuanced, but they're all on top of it. Our localities are all on top of this issue because it is such an important thing in the Northern Virginia area. So
I'd just like to add that, reacting to what Kate just said as well, with the exception of the decisions to be evaluated at a future meeting about the ongoing or open-ended nature of zero and reduced fare, I think everything in this first program framework column really gets at the flexibility of the program and expanding that flexibility, which I really appreciate. And I think a lot of systems will be able to find something in this menu of offerings that could work for them rather than having a really prescribed set of categories that doesn't encourage that kind of innovation that Kate is talking about, where you have a hybrid system where maybe you're using one solution for this component of your system, and then you can use another component to help out there. And I think this recommendation really provides that broad flexibility that will allow transit agencies to become even more innovative in how they approach, funding all of these different initiatives. So I think that is definitely headed in the right direction.
Thanks, Paula. Anybody else? All right.
I will just also note, while he's not here, Brian Booth, one of our TSDAC members, did provide comments to the staff on this issue as well. So I will just note that he had a concern about the possibility of ongoing support for zero fare or reduced fare through TRIP if it just makes TRIP another source of operating funds. Allowing ongoing support after the initial 3-year step down would open the door for projects that are operating in nature and funded through regional connectivity to make the argument they should receive ongoing support for their services. Because I recognize that zero reduced fare part of TRIP needs revamping, otherwise there'd be very little project activity. However, I think whatever is considered needs to really be analyzed to avoid unintended consequences in the future. So I just wanted to share that since he had sent us that specific comment on this topic we've been discussing.
Okay.
Mr. Chair. Well,
Yes.
to get to Cindy's question about the voting and the process, stuff like that, I think having this conversation is important today. We're going to go through several more action items. I think July is when we imagine that we're going to be seeking the actual votes from TSDAC on each one of the policy decisions that we're still have open out there today. So that's where.
Back to slide 10, and
Correct.
that is what you said. I've gone back far enough. Thank you.
Quite all right. I just want to make sure it's clear that we're not expecting that today. This discussion is going to form a lot of work over the next few weeks. Thank you.
So next month I'll have a draft policy for everyone to review. Process.
Okay.
Back to making efficient and responsible investments in transit.
Got it.
Thank you.
All right. 10:55, and we are 35 minutes ahead of schedule here. I think we can all get on board with that. Okay, so now we're pivoting back to merit operating. And I know you all have seen this graphic many, many times now, but we're just going to remind you all where we are in the conceptual process of merit operating proposal. So we've highlighted down here at the bottom the Performance and Stability Fund. That's where we're going to focus most of our attention here today on kind of bringing forward some concrete recommendations on how that fund will work. But before we dive into that, quickly, we created these graphics in preparation for the VTA conference. This is probably less relevant for our TSDAC members, but it is more relevant and seemed to resonate with our transit agencies. So we wanted to bring these graphics to you all too, just to so that you guys can better understand the proposal here. These graphics do not include the cohorting of the various revenue buckets. It just simplifies this down to transit agencies will get their allocations each year from 2 buckets. You got your sizing metric bucket, which accounts for 95% of the revenues for each cohort. That makes up your base allocation each year. That's where we think we're going to have some significant predictability and stability of that 95% bucket. Agencies that are good performers, and we obviously have to define what good performance is, but agencies that are good performers will get on top of their base allocation an additional allocation for good performance. And that's the 5% set aside performance and stability fund revenues. And so you add the 2 up, and that's your total allocation for the year. So just walking through each of these just in a little bit more detail, we've already determined the proposed sizing metric weights for a rural cohort. Each of those 4 data points: operating cost 50% weight, ridership 20% weight, revenue hours 15, revenue miles 15. This portion of the formula will still be capped at 30%. So we're still including the 30% cap with the sizing metric. Again, the removal of the 30% cap comes with the performance. And additionally, very important, we're proposing to utilize a 3-year average data set for this sizing metric. I'll just emphasize it again. That's where we're going to see most of the predictability and stability issues being addressed. On the performance and stability fund part, again, this is just 5% of the revenues. Today, we are bringing forward what those metrics should be for each of the cohorts. So that's the little halo. We got to define what those metrics are and how we define good performance. So that's what we're bringing forward to you all today. Performance funding will be available to all agencies. This gets back to the point of there's no cap here under the Performance and Stability Fund. We mentioned this at the last meeting, but we intend to utilize a single year of data on this so that we can actually respond to big changes in service for improvement. And we want to be able to adapt quickly for performance funding. And then the last bullet point here, which I'm sure we're going to have a good conversation about in a little bit, is stability funding is provided to agencies who experience significant formula anomalies. So they will also be able to tap into this 5% set aside. And again, it's sizing plus performance and stability equals total agency allocation. So we wanted to show you all this again, because we presented it to the folks at the VTA conference and it seemed to make sense to folks. But we did this for each of the different cohorts, right? So the only thing that's changing right now on these slides is the sizing metric weights, but we did want to just capture it. So again, I'll go back. This is rural. This is small urban. This is larger. So, anyway, just wanted to put that out there. It might be easier to understand this simplified version. Okay, so the big decisions that we need to make around the Performance and Stability Fund. We've broken it down into 5 sub decisions here, 3C, 3D, 3E, 3F, and 3G. As a reminder, we already made recommendations for 3A and 3B at the last meeting. So 3C is what should be the performance metrics and the associated performance targets for the rural cohort. We have the same thing for small urban and 3D. Same thing for the large urban and 3E. So we're going to present those first. And then additionally, we have to decide whether or not the performance targets should be set in policy. So locking it in policy or changing that, that target year over year using new data. So there are advantages, disadvantages to that. We'll kind of walk you all through that. at the 3F decision. And then also, obviously, we need to put a little bit more definition into how the stability funding. Okay, so performance funding. This is a repeat from the last meeting, and this is just a refresher on the metrics that we have, or the performance measures rather, that we have available to us. So we have those cost efficiency measures being operating cost per revenue hour and operating cost per revenue mile. Those measure how efficiently a system is running, regardless of how many passengers are actually using the service. We then have cost effectiveness, which is operating cost per passenger, and that compares the cost to the actual outcomes of people using the service. We have productivity, passengers per hour, passengers per mile. These measure how many passengers are using the service per unit of service, so units being hours and miles. And then the last one here, service utilization, which is passenger miles traveled per revenue hour and passenger miles traveled per revenue mile. And these focus on passenger load. So on average, how many people are on the bus per hour and per mile. So at the last meeting, I do want to highlight just the service utilization real quick. At the last meeting, I believe I mentioned that only certain agencies report that data, which is still the case. We don't have a full data set across the Commonwealth for passenger miles traveled. We did dig a little bit deeper into the federal requirements for this, and FTA requires that agencies report PMT data, collect and report PMT data to them if they're an urbanized agency, so small or large urban, and then they run at least 30 buses in peak service. So if you meet those two criteria, then you have to report PMT to the federal government. And so we have all of our large urban systems, except one, Petersburg, currently collects and reports PMT data. And then we have roughly half of our small urban agencies collect PMT data because they meet those two requirements. And so I did just want to bring that to you. We're going to talk more about that here in a few slides. We're going to circle back to that, but did just want to clarify. Okay, so we have also modified this graphic just a little bit since our last meeting to try to simplify this. We have taken off numbers from this graphic to really just try to simplify as best as possible on how we envision this performance funding concept to work. And again, we are modeling this over FTA's STIC program. They do very similar exercise to provide performance funding through their 5307 program. But again, how this would work is we have to define in that glow at the top, we have to define the measures that we want to use for each cohort. We have to define the targets, performance targets that we want to set for each measure within each cohort. And then once we define that, then we have all the data. So all these colored cells here at the bottom, we have that data already. So then it's just a matter of, does an agency A hit measure 1, target A? Yes or no? In this, the answer is no. And so they get an X mark. They do not get performance funding for that, but they do hit the target for measure 2, target B. So there's the green halo and the check mark. So you can kind of see just generally how this would work, and then you total up how many targets are hit. I do want to mention here, because this was a question that was brought up also, is that in this concept, each measure is weighted the same. So you're not saying one measure is more important than the other. Because you're just totaling up all the targets that are achieved, there's no weighting at all. They all have equal weights. So that could be something that's considered in future years if TSDAC and DRPT and stakeholders think that there should be a difference, but for now, we are assuming that they are all the same weights.
And likewise, we're assuming there will be 3 measures, not 2, not 4.
Our recommendations go beyond 3 for one of the.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, but we have available to us, I guess, 7 total for the urban agencies and 5 total for the rural agencies, since none of them collect PMT
Right.
at all. So that's the world of possibilities. But that's a great segue, Kate, into some considerations here. As we're thinking about which performance metrics or measures rather we want to select for each cohort. And I think, Kate, you made the comment a couple meetings ago that we're really focusing on metrics that are most suitable for the area type, not for specific agencies. And we need to keep reminding ourselves of that. That was a very good comment, is that these cohorts, we're not breaking the cohorts up by agency type. It's by area type. You have the large urban areas, you have the small urban areas, and you have the rural areas. And of course, there are different transit agencies that serve those types of areas, but that's really what we're focusing on. So it's a cohort area type. Metrics should be used to incentivize good or better performance. That's kind of an obvious. But the last bullet point here on the top, this kind of gets at what Kate was just saying. So the more metrics that we select to use, the less funding will be available per target surpassed. So if you just did the whole world of possibilities, then the reward that you're giving per target hit gets diminished, because chances are there are way more targets being hit the more measures that you select. So that was something that we definitely kept in mind as we were coming up with our recommendations. And then as far as defining performance targets go, we need to identify targets that could act as reach goals for agencies rather than just the average. You can set a target a million different ways. We've looked at weighted average, we've looked at the mean, we've looked at the median, we've looked at percentiles, we've looked at fixed numbers, we've looked at, there's a calculator tool that we're using in the background. But all is to say, we kind of landed that average is not good enough, that average is in our minds not good performance, that you got to go a little bit above average to really be considered as a good performer. So we'll circle back to that comment here in, I think, maybe the next slide. But last one here, only agencies that surpass the targets will receive performance funding. And that gets back to the binary nature of this proposal, is that you either surpass or you don't. So you either get performance funding because you surpass that target, or you do not get the performance funding because you fall below that target. So that leads us into the first recommendation, and that's policy decision 3C. What should be the performance metrics for the rural cohort? So DRPT is recommending 3 metrics for the rural cohort: cost per hour, cost per mile, cost per passenger. The consistency here, you can see, is cost per hour, per mile, per passenger. This aligns with what we heard at the cohort workshop, that our rural agencies prefer the cost measures as opposed to the more productivity measures, which also made sense to us. As a reminder, we have a very special relationship with our rural transit providers in Virginia, because we're not just providing them state operating dollars, we're providing them federal operating dollars. And so there's an incentive for the state also for these agencies to be cost efficient and cost effective, since we are accounting for a large portion of their operating budgets. So this honestly seemed like a no-brainer to us. They wanted this, we wanted this, seemed aligned. So that's our recommendation here. And then the second recommendation, this gets back at how do you set the funding threshold, the target level. And so DRPT is recommending to utilize a 60th percentile target for each metric to determine which agencies receive performance funding. I will elaborate on this one, that the intent here, and I don't want to steal the thunder of 2 or 3 recommendations here coming forward, but the idea here is that the 60th percentile target would be calculated, and then we would potentially use that in policy, that actual number in policy. Okay, but the target is 60th percentile is what we're presenting. And I'll elaborate more on the put it in policy versus recalculate it every year, because that is coming up in a few slides. before I move to small urban, any comments on the rural cohort?
Question, please.
Yes, Dr. Spoot.
You say that the 60th percentile would be the target. Going up into the first group where we identify 3 areas of measurement, suppose you, and I'm just making this up, suppose you were at the 10th percentile on the first 2 and the top percentile on the third one. How does that all play out?
Yes, that's a great question. So that is, I mean, you can kind of, agency A and agency B fall into that example perfectly. You can see that we have 3 measures and we're proposing 3 measures for the rural cohort. And so agency A doesn't hit the target for measure 1, doesn't hit the target for measure 3. So in your example, they could be in the 10th percentile, but they exceed the target for measure 2. So they get the benefit of 1 target being hit.
So how does that translate into an amount of money?
That's another great question. So, what the way that this works is we would total up the number of targets hit per agency. Okay, so you can see that on the far right column.
Right.
And Nate, you might need to help me with the math here, how this works. Is that the number of targets hit is then multiplied times the size weight of the agency, right? So this is where it gets very mathy, but each agency is a different size, right? And we know that in the sizing metric. We originally, when we looked at this, we just assumed that it would be the same for every target hit. But when we ran the numbers, some transit agencies that are actually good performers, but really, really small, would get tenfold their allocation in performance funding. So we obviously couldn't do that. And so in order for it to be equitable and proportional to their agency size, we're bringing in that sizing metric because everybody has a size weight, and we're multiplying it times the target hit. And then we're also, I can't remember if it's divided by the amount of funding available, but that's generally the figures that factor in here. So agency A, they would get, it depends how big they are compared to agency B and C. But agency A, let's say that they were a big agency in this cohort, and agency B was a small agency in this cohort. They're both hitting the same number of targets, but agency B's performance funding would be less than agency A's performance funding.
But as a percentage, it'd be, I mean, that's maybe the better way to think of it. They would get a percent boost over their current funding.
Yes.
I think that's a better,
And if they hit 2 performance targets, then
Then they
they get
get
2%.
2%. I mean, that's, yeah.
Or 3, you get a 3%
Yeah.
boost.
I
So
think that
you get a boost
the
for
boost
hitting
is
a
about
target.
percentage. And I
but
think then
yeah.
it gets away from trying to go back and keep talking about
Yeah.
sizing stuff, but it's a percent boost. You
Yes.
get a percent bonus. Okay.
I think that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. I mean, the key thing is that the more targets you're hitting, the more money you're getting, proportional to your agency size.
Right. Proportional to your.
And that's true for all the cohorts.
Great question, though. Anything else on rural before we move into smaller? Okay. All right. So the next policy decision, 3D, what should be the performance metrics for the small urban cohort? DRPT is recommending 3 measures here. Passengers per hour, passengers per mile, and passenger miles traveled per mile. So the first 2 are those productivity measures. And the last one is the is one of the 2 service utilization measures. And so the thought process here with these recommendations, I'll start with passengers per hour and passengers per mile. We felt like these are really the gold standard performance measures for really all urban systems that urban systems are usually reporting these data points to their policy boards, that they are tracking this data closely. when thinking about making service tweaks. And so we felt like these were two very good measures to use for honestly both small urban and large urban for those area types. Passenger miles traveled per mile was one that internally we had a lot of conversation about. Originally, as I mentioned earlier, we thought this was not a good measure to use because not all small urban agencies collect this data. But we wanted to see, because the STIC program is specifically for small urban agencies, and we knew that this was a measure used in STIC, we wanted to see how the math worked with FTA. How did they address this issue? So looking into the data, how they do it is, it's pretty simple. If you don't collect or report PMT per mile or PMT per hour, you can't get credit for that measure, right? So there's actually a built-in incentive. There's nothing that prohibits small urban agencies from collecting that data and reporting it to the federal government. They're just not required to. So I think FTA doesn't say anywhere in the formula, but they're kind of incentivizing these other agencies who aren't required to report the data to report it, because if they do, they might actually get more federal funding. So we saw that and we were like, huh, that's interesting. How would that impact our recommendations, if at all? And where we landed was that because of this, so STIC funding, there's an incentive for all of us here in Virginia that the more STIC funding that can be brought into the state, the better. It's better for everyone. This is all just performance bonus funding through the 5307 program. So we want to encourage and incentivize our small urban providers to all collect this, start collecting this data and reporting it to NTD. Because if that happens, there's a good chance that more federal funding will flow into Virginia. But then agencies could also get rewarded through performance funding on the state side. So this is kind of a complicated one. And again, we had a lot of conversation and pros and cons of including this. We didn't really like PMT per hour as much because that one is a little bit more geared towards commuter long haul services. Because when you think of PMT per hour, and this took me a while to wrap my head around, is that in an urban area, and a bus could travel, say they're going 10 miles per hour, but they have a full bus. In that hour, they travel 10 miles, say there are 50 people on the bus, so 10 times 50, that's your PMT, okay? Or PMT per hour. That might be a little, it's 50 times, yeah, anyway. But if the bus is traveling 50 miles per hour with the same number of passengers, then that number is fivefold. So that figure, we just have a hard time with for our small urban providers because there aren't any. I know there's the Afton Express, which Paula and the Bright team operate, but there aren't many commuter services in our small urban agencies. And so we didn't think that that was really a good measure to use. But PMT per mile, we thought was a decent one to use. And again, it's really doubling down on a measure that's already used in STIC. So, so that is the proposal, and same setting target is 60th percentile. But we are very interested in the feedback and the concept here that we are presenting smaller.
Sure. Just a question. And I'm really glad actually, Grant, that you brought up, because what focused to me is the STIC program that we keep talking about. Maybe, so all of our systems that are serving small urban areas are eligible to play in the federal STIC. Yes. Okay. So part of that was like, I love it to get more money, but it's kind of like, are they allowed to get, like, because there's a special federal program that none of our others can get to, is there a skewing of like, they get the extra superstar access to funding that maybe others don't? And that's maybe being incredibly parochial, but none of our rurals can't, and our large urban systems have no access to this additional operating funding that the feds have. So how does this sort of align with, I love these measures. I think all that stuff's great, but all of a sudden I was thinking, it was like, wow, like one agency could do really well and they get more federal money and they get more state money that nobody else can play in.
Yeah. And I think,
do we care? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up a good point. I mean, because the revenues are cohorted, it's not like the small urban agencies are dipping into money that's available to all transit agencies. They're just still playing within their small urban cohorted revenues. So, I mean, it does bring up an interesting point that they are a unique set of agencies because they have, it would be access to the performance funding on the state side and access on the federal side. I do think that when we were looking at this, like trying to not perfectly align our measures with FTAs, but I think there is an incentive for us to try to align at least one of them. And that's why we selected one, because we want to bring
Well,
more
that
state
was my
funding into
follow-up
Virginia.
question on with which are these other than PMT per mile is the federal?
Just PMT.
PMT, okay.
Yeah, the other, it's PMT per mile, it's 6 measures, PMT per mile, PMT per hour, so the one that we did not select. And then I'm pretty confident, don't hold me to this, but the other 4 measures are per capita.
Yep.
So it's population,
Hmm.
and so we can't do those other 4. So really, it's just PMT per hour and PMT per mile are the ones that we can double down on.
What's the magnitude of the funding? Potentially it would be available through STIC?
On the federal side, it's roughly $500,000 per metric hit. So agencies, there's 6 available metrics, so you can roughly get about $3 million if you hit them all. And I was talking to Brian Booth at the VTA conference. I haven't verified this, but he was saying they get more 5307 STIC money than they get in regular money because they hit almost every single metric every single year.
And that can be used for operating, unlike,
It can be used for
Most-
operating or capital.
Capital.
It's either one. So it's very flexible funding. So we really like doubling down on this. We think that there's really some good thought behind that, but certainly want to hear from our small urban providers. So yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'll preface this by saying I don't disagree with any of this. I think this is a good model and I fully agree with the concept behind it. I did want to correct one comment you made, though, that you said there's nothing stopping these agencies from reporting this. We don't have the technology on our vehicles to collect this data. So that would require an ITS investment in the transit agency to acquire the technology to be able to track that. And that would be shifting those agencies from being, limited reporters to full reporters to NTD, which is also a much larger burden on a staff. And, for example, for our agency, our staff is 2 people. So becoming a full reporter would be a big lift for somebody. Not saying there's not value in doing it. I do agree with that. But I did want to just correct that there is something preventing agencies from reporting that data.
Thank you, Paul, because you are absolutely correct. You would turn into agencies that are currently not collecting PMT, but would become full reporters. That adds more oversight, compliance related things. So yes, and of course the technology to capture that. There are some low tech options that aren't great. They're kind of burdensome, but then having tech on board, so automated passenger counters is really how you get PMT data in a more streamlined fashion. So yeah, that very, very good points.
and I just put a very fine point on it. So your agency would not be eligible for the spot. I think that's
Not
really,
without a
No, no,
substantial
no.
investment in our system.
Right.
support.
so that, I think that's really important.
Well,
Wouldn't
I'm
be
probably
eligible
gonna do stuff.
at target if they hit the other measures. They could be in it,
That was
but they would automatically not get PMT.
correct. So they could still get passengers per hour and passengers per mile. They just wouldn't, until they started reporting, they wouldn't be eligible for the PMT per mile performance boost. I should also mention that at the last meeting, we showed you all kind of the data table and like the sizing metric, just scenario allocations. You might recall with the small urban cohort, it was the smaller agencies that actually did really well in the proposed weighting with sizing, and we were hopeful that the university towns would make up for it in the performance side. And that's what we see with this, is that the Winchesters, the Bristols, the CSPDCs, they do not currently report it, but they do very well in the sizing metric. It's the Blacksburgs, the Williamsburgs, the Harrisonburgs that do really well with PMT per mile and would then hit these targets most likely. So that's kind of the balancing act when we were looking at the scenarios. We thought that it made sense, but these are great comments.
Remind me what DRPT resources are out there for ITS.
That's not to say.
Maximize.
Yes, we have the Merit Capital Program, which you guys help us think through that as well. Currently, the rates for like an APC project to get APCs installed on buses, we have a maximum state percentage of 68% in policy. And then for those who operate in, well, I guess this wouldn't apply to, so 5311's irrelevant.
I would like to hear from the other small urban agencies that would be in this scenario. I don't want to speak on behalf of all of them. But on behalf of our agency, we are already exploring this prior to this coming up because the stick money is available and it's, it's worthwhile to look into what the cost benefit would be to be able to collect that data and potentially reach some of that money. So from my perspective, I agree with everything Grant said. I think the trade-off between smaller agencies getting more money in the operating and the sizing metric, and then, this offsetting that, I think is great. I would definitely want to hear from the other agencies that would be affected by it before making any decisions about that.
Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I have one other comment, and I like what we're doing here. But we need to keep in mind that we will be lifting up data that on the surface of it suggests that mass transit is not being particularly effective. And, my initial reaction to the data that we distributed, you all distributed at the last meeting was, my golly, this is terrible. And as we have talked through this, I've learned a lot to understand why some of this is, but most people will not have this background. And when we say, for example, that in the rural systems, that the average passenger per mile is 0.2, so even in the large urban systems, it's only 4.5, I think. On the surface of it, we're going to be creating concerns that it takes a lot more understanding of how these systems work than most people have. So I don't know if there's anything we can do about that other than be ready to explain these numbers. But these numbers are not particularly helpful.
That's a good point, but a lot of it is the narrative. Because we've talked about what is the purpose of this cohort versus commuter and mass transit. There's other service needs. It's just fewer number of passengers per hour to get to that medical appointment or that job.
That's right. There's the lack of an alternative means of living your life.
Yeah.
For many people in these communities.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to be prepared to lift that up to promote understanding of this.
Right.
Hopefully we don't want too many people riding for dialysis or things like that. That's not our goal. But for those who need it, it is absolutely critical for them.
And that's a great line. I don't want to be in any discussion.
Yeah, all the formulas and these pretty graphics are important, but it doesn't tell that story.
Yeah,
Mhm.
the individual
Right.
People,
no, that narrative will be important.
the goals that we talk about sort of early on, and then we get into the weeds.
Yes.
Hey,
Okay.
But I like what you're doing. I'm fine with it.
okay. So for the large urban cohort, DRPT is recommending, it's basically the same measures as small urban, but we are adding in passenger miles traveled per hour. So it's the 2 service utilization measures and the 2 productivity measures. So the difference here between small urban and large urban, we still feel like passengers per hour and passenger per mile, those are gold standard measures that we think all urban systems should be rewarded for if they have a good performance with respect to those measures. PMT per hour, we felt like inclusion potentially was appropriate for large urban, because this is where we start to see that diversity of systems and some commuter-based services that run through our large urban areas. And so that was kind of the thought process here, is that you kind of have, and in talking internally and looking at our large urban areas, you have some large urban areas that are more sprawling and less compact. And so those sprawling large urban areas have to have these commuter services to get people to the central business district. And so they're running a lot of miles and hours to get, people to and from, because these are longer distances. Whereas agencies that operate in more compact, large urban areas, they're not traveling as far. And so they have the ability of picking up passengers all over the place. They're in dense population centers, whereas the sprawling large urban areas don't have that benefit. So this kind of balances those two together a little bit. And again, all of these measures would be weighted equally. So we're saying basically here that we have 2 kind of different types of large urban areas. You got the sprawling and you got the urban. And the urbans are probably going to do a whole lot better, or I say urban, more compact, densely populated. They're going to probably do a lot better with passengers per hour and passengers per mile, whereas the sprawling large urban areas are going to probably do better with anything PMT related. That's generally what we see with the data. That mostly holds true. But that was kind of the thought process. This was, again, more of an art than a science. We obviously wanted to see the potential allocations, as we turn things on and off. But yeah, we thought that balancing the 4 here was appropriate. And again, the same target setting approach here would apply, with 60th percentile as the target for each of these 4 measures.
Take a look at the city of Petersburg again sometime, which is reporting 0 passenger miles traveled per hour and 0 passenger miles traveled per mile. And that just can't be.
Yeah, Dr. Smoot, that is because Petersburg does not collect that data. So you have pure zero. Yep. They're the one large urban system that does not report either of these. Now, we have talked to Petersburg, and we potentially could work with them on collecting that data. We have some ideas in place that could get them that data pretty quickly, because they were already kind of moving in that direction.
Thank you.
Now, in terms of this large urban, you were talking about taking into account the impact of a compact population versus dispersed population in a large suburban area, for instance. Is that true also in rural? There do seem to be, there are a lot of small counties that are rural.
Yeah.
And some that are very large.
Yeah, I mean, the one that kind of comes to mind is Danville, which is more compact. It's a rural city, but they have, transit needs that spread outside of the city limits. So yeah, it can apply in really all the cohorts. The difference here is that, like, rural agencies, I don't think we would probably ever want to have all of them collect PMT, because to Paula's point, like, there is a capital expense to getting the technology on the buses. And if we're doing that for all of our rural providers, that's now 20 rural agencies, we have to get all those buses equipped. So that would be a pretty significant effort.
As I said, it looks in the rural, you actually do have a cost per mile and a cost per hour. So that hopefully so if you are doing these huge routes and you're really efficient in your costs, I think it probably captured it nicely in a simple way. for the rurals is what's being proposed here.
So we talked about how the small urbans get sort of the potential bump with more stick money, and we know the rurals have the 5311. One of our earlier slides, we talked about how the large urban have access, not all, but some, to regional money. So I was trying to think through sort of, is there any unintended consequences with this group, like Kate brought up?
Yeah, it's a good point. Not sure.
Or is it because all of them have incentives? It's a wash. And maybe that's it. I
Well,
mean, that's, I think, the aha
I was
moment that
gonna
I've
say,
had.
I
is
mean,
like,
and it's the federal transit program is definitely set up similar to us, where a bulk of that funding goes to the direct recipients, which are the large urban areas. And so they are getting federal operating support too. It's not that they're not. And
the federal capital.
oh, excuse me, yeah.
I'm like, they don't get any operating. I'm like,
sorry. Yeah. Oh my gosh, total snafu there. So that is true. They do not get federal I should know that, having been in many a debate on that on different times. But they do get, with the capital funding, that is calculating the formulas for that. But you're right, they are not getting federal operating support. And that's
So,
a
I mean,
federal
it could
There is a
be.
caveat to that. If you operate under 100 buses, then you can use it for
Yeah.
operating, but the
I don't none of us have. that. Operating money. Federal money.
any other thoughts? Okay. Along here. So those were the recommendations for each of the 3 cohorts and the performance measures that we're recommending and the threshold for each of those. Now we get into, should we set the performance targets in policy, locking them in, or make it dynamic year over year? And we thought this through as well. There are pros and cons to each. Ultimately, our recommendation landed at, and this gets to one of Maria's points earlier, we should lock in wherever we can for transparency purposes and simplicity purposes. We kind of envisioned a scenario where next year, let's say hypothetically, if the 60th percentile target was, say, 20 passengers per hour for large urban, let's just say hypothetically, and an agency was at 19 passengers per hour. If that agency and staff went to their boards and say, if we make these small improvements, we could get performance funding. But then the next year we recalculate it, they are now 21 passengers per hour, but the target's now 22. And then it just becomes a little bit more complicated. We wanted to simplify and just be like, here are the targets. They'll be reviewed at least every 3 years by DRPT and TSDAC as part of this process. We could review it every year with you guys just to like show you guys the numbers, but we wanted to lock it in just for simplicity purposes, but open to ideas and feedback here.
Mr. Chair, would there be any value to having a review in 1 year, since this is also new, and then maybe locking it in for 3 years? See how it worked in the first year.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, and I'm sorry, I haven't really talked to Alan and Maria about this one, but with a lot of changes happening to the formula all at once, I kind of feel like next year, once we run it, we're going to have to do a little bit of a deeper dive with you all to really see, did it meet all of our expectations? Do we need to make some modifications? So like my mind, like the first year in, we got to take a really hard look at this. So yeah, it seems reasonable.
And so if that's the case, I definitely would encourage, if there's a way that we can go even longer than 3 years without completely changing this, because I do know one thing that I've heard is that it's like there's just a lot of changes in that whole predictability, which I know you guys are trying to get at. I think our localities, if there is an opportunity, maybe it is just next year, to kind of let things hang out. The federal transit formula has been the same for probably decades now. And so it'd be really nice if we could eventually, we have to review it every 3 years, but maybe we don't have to change it every 3 years. So, yeah, we don't want it wrong, but maybe there's an opportunity to not blow up everything every 3 years, which is kind of what's been happening.
Yeah.
And I know that adds a lot of anxiety to probably you as well as our localities.
That's consistent with the comp plan work we do. We're required to
Right.
review it every 5 years. It doesn't say we need to
Rewrite it.
rewrite it.
And if I would, I think the language that we have here would enable us to do that. It would say like, we would like to set it, but we are going to review it. And again, I think it's important, Noel, to your point too, of like, yes, next year, we're going to review everything and sort of see how things did play out. I will state again, having just this morning re-looked at the revenue forecast for the next few years. Next year is a little dip from where we are this year. So there will be a little dip from this. This year was a FY27 was good for transit agencies and our SIP and the bump that we had. So again, it may be that folks go down a little bit, but it's like if everyone is because we got a little bit less revenue, that's different from did the formula play out the way it did. So I think with all of this to be able to have that discussion next year, but yes, for the state, we would like to move towards a trend of locking things in for a longer period of time because that just enables transit agencies to better program those dollars. It enables local officials to know what the state fund is likely to be so they can be making decisions as local electeds about support that they are doing for transit and transit projects and those budgets. And so the more we can kind of get that in, I think it also puts us more on equal footing with our peers who are doing highway projects who have some of that stability and kind of looking and projecting at things.
So in terms of preserving your transparency, your objective of transparency, indicating that this first year is going to be the way in which you test whether the fundamental system works, but that the plan is to.
Yeah, we'll
lock in.
review
Right.
things next year, but I think our desire is to review, not to
Yeah.
change unless there's really strong reasons to change, right? But I do think for this performance target, and maybe this is my like past life as both a teacher and a parent and a student at one point, like it is that like nothing's more frustrating than like, here's the target. I just missed it this year. I do all this stuff to come back and be ready for next year. And then the target, you know, like there's whole cartoon strips about that, right? Like you just keep moving. So I think that's the notion, like if this is all about trying to reward good performance, let's tell you what is good performance. And then you can work to try to meet that mark and exceed that mark.
And I think getting back to what Graham was saying, in almost each of those instances, the measures that are being rewarded are things that agencies are presenting to their board routinely. The cost stuff for the rurals, the mix of cost and performance for the small urbans and the performance for the larger, right?
This is probably stating the obvious, but all of these measures, you're not going to flip a switch and change and get better improvement in 1 year. So like, if you know what the goalpost is, then you're going to need some time to work towards it. Especially
Some
you
of
gotta
them, if
come
you're
to the
close, you
recommendation.
could actually change it in a year, but yeah.
Yes, if you're close, you could tip it.
Yeah, when we ran the model using the most recent data that we had available, there were some agencies, I won't name all of them or any of them really, but some were very close to each, they had no targets hit, but were within reason potentially of hitting all 4 targets, the large urban agency. So yeah, if you're close and you lock those figures in, small change could have some significant impact on performance.
And using that data that we collect from all of you and then running it through this, we can have conversations with folks. They're going to know exactly how close they are and how far they are. Some of them may be like, that's going to take me 2 or 3 years to get there. Some are like, wow, I really know where I need to go. So that is, I think, a partnership that we have is y'all are sharing the data with us. We can help you translate that data and where can you focus the most, where you can get the most bang for your buck. Because in some years, maybe like, well, we're going to hone in on one of these measures because we're really, really close. Because that's going to really help us, but we're still all going in the same direction. We have the ability to have those conversations with folks over the years as new data comes in every year.
Alan was saying that I was just thinking back to, we talked about narrative and storytelling for like who's on the bus. But that's also an important storytelling for why we do this, because the code says it's performance measurement. So let's focus on this and improvement, not the 5% or the humongous sizing. So that was interesting. You were commenting that it was, had some thoughts, other comments I was hearing. Storytelling when we're proposing this change.
Hey, Mr. Chair.
So let me just ask one other, it's really stupid question, and that is, so let's say we find that there's a reasonable number of agencies that are really close, and they manage to move in a year to meeting more of the targets. That means that those who are getting performance benefits are going to be losing money in a sense, right? Those that are already there.
Pot gets shared.
One pot, it is one
Right.
pot, yeah.
Right.
So if
Yeah.
you got all the pie slices.
Yep.
You were very satisfied,
That's
that
right.
you got to eat the whole pie the first
Yeah,
year, but
yeah.
then the next year you have to share the pie with
Right.
5 other
Mhm.
people.
Within your cohort.
So Susan, more 5, a little 5% part of it, so that's
Yeah.
better than we.
That's right.
Now,
Sure.
yeah.
The sustainable funding.
And I do think that in the messaging with this, we will stress that like the sizing metric, the base allocation is what agencies should really be looking at.
Mhm.
And that's where we can probably project into the future with some degree of confidence what their allocations will be, because those aren't, if you're doing the 3-year average, you're not going to see those big swings. The performance funding, yeah, there are a number of factors that can influence performance funding year over year.
Mhm.
Some that are totally outside of an agency's control, which are how many agencies am I sharing the pot with because I'm a good person.
Any other comments, thoughts?
Okay. Well, the next part of this is stability funding. Lunch is here, so this might be a natural break
Okay.
if you want to do a quick break for lunch.
Okay, and so shall we say 12:15? Is that long enough?
At 12:30 on the agenda if you want a little bit extra time, but I think we're making good time. It's up to you though, Mr.
Totally
Chair.
up to you.
I'm getting on.
All right.
Okay.
So let's adjourn till 12:15.
12:15, all right. You mute your room. About
Yes, we are ready to go.
Okay. Call this meeting back to order.
All right. So, we talked about performance. Now we're gonna pivot to the stability part of the performance and stability fund. So, you guys have heard now many times that we, as staff, keep saying that the introduction of the 3-year average data set in the sizing metric, we truly believe will lead to better predictability with the entire form. We needed to test that theory. Okay, so we actually looked at real data, looking back 3 years, we ran some models here. And we confirmed that by introducing a 3-year average data set for the sizing metric, there is significant improvement to predictability and stability. And so we have here on the screen a graphic. This is just an example transit agency. We looked at Fairfax County because they've seen some ups and downs over the years. And we applied the 3-year average data set to their sizing metric. And you can see here FY 25, 26, and 27, the change in the sizing metric, the dotted lines is the 3-year average. And the solid lines are the single year of data. So this just graphically shows what's going on when you do the 3-year average data set, is that you're really getting that smoothing out of the significant dips or peaks and valleys with the data. We looked at this for all of our agencies and there was significant improvement. So we wanted to validate with actual data that this proposal will truly be more predictable and stable. I guess additionally, we've kind of thought about the primary situations where stability funding could potentially come into play. And we've whittled it down to really 2 primary examples. It's when operating costs drop for an agency due to some labor or administrative circumstance, but the output metrics, those being hours, miles, even ridership, they relatively the same increase. So that's what we're kind of calling a potential anomaly here. And then the other one is natural disasters that impact potentially one or multiple agencies. And that's when you see the output metrics being impacted because service is no longer provided due to recovery efforts of the natural disaster. So we looked back all the way through FY20, looking back to see out of these 2 primary circumstances of anomalies, how often did it happen and what was the average financial impact? Because we really wanted to see, is this even something that happens frequently? And if so, what's the financial impact? So what we found was that of the 8 years that we ran the formula dating back to FY20, only 5 times were these anomalies present. And the average impact for each instance was less than $500,000, which $500,000 compared to the total amount of merit operating revenues that we get every year, it's less than 0.5%. So that leads us to, we really do not believe that stability funding will need to be provided much at all. Like we're thinking maybe every other year potentially, if trends hold true, that we might have someone who needs to be considered for stability funding, but this is not an every year thing likely. This is also something that will not significantly move the needle in terms of funding amounts. So we wanted to kind of throw that out there with the data analysis that we did. And that kind of tees up our recommendation for how we define the framework for stability funding. So we mentioned this at the last meeting that our intent is to run the formula in full each year to look for significant anomalies. And if significant anomalies are apparent, DRPT will work closely with the transit agency that is experiencing that anomaly to better understand the underlying data, cost, hours, miles, ridership, and the potential need for stability funding. if we believe that stability funding is warranted, how this would work in practice is that the DRPT director would have the authority to recommend using some of that performance and stability fund, that 5% off the top revenues, to help that agency, lift them up just a little. And so DRPT, under this recommendation, would also be required to present to this group, to our stakeholders, and to the CTB, the use of that stability funding and the rationale for using it. We want to be fully transparent on the rationale. I know this is kind of still a little squishy, but we felt like it was on us to really present to you guys, to stakeholders, and to the CTV whenever we tapped into stability funding. So we're still kind of leaving it a little broad, again, because there's so many different scenarios of anomalies that it's hard to really put more definition here. But we would certainly appreciate feedback that you all had on these recommendations.
To say something, sorry. I appreciate the recognition that, and how you're addressing the 3-year average because of the fact of year to year to year to year. So I greatly appreciate there's a recognition. And actually the fact, if you truly have run the numbers, as you say, and this is going to be such an outlier. I appreciate sort of this, what you guys are proposing, in terms of transparency of that, what may or may not ever happen. And that it's not 10 agencies, but it may be one, and it may be only every couple of years, and it may be, obviously, because you have to articulate it, it's going to be something that can be easily articulated. And it's going to be all of us would generally, CTB, of course, involved, right, would agree, like, oh my goodness, yeah, that's an important thing to do at that moment.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
Any other comments? Seems like it makes good sense to me.
Is Dr. back on?
Dr. Smoot?
Maybe I do.
Get a question on it. I just want to see if he was on.
If I could, maybe just for clarification, I don't have the slide up with the formula. So run through the formula. You determine this off year, we have one person that's impacted. Back to that cohort. Is the stability fund also cohorted like performance?
Yes. So the performance and stability fund, if you might recall, at the last meeting, we determined that the performance and stability fund should be cohorted using the same percentages as the top pot. And so each cohort basically has their own performance and stability fund.
So now we're just got back to slide 21, so I have it in front of me. So now we've gone into the stability fund, and this one agency is going to get X dollar amount. Where does that roll back into the formula, and does it top? Is it capped at 30?
So the performance and stability fund is not capped. There's no 30% cap. It's only on the same. And so honestly, the more complex version of this would probably present this a little bit better. I'll try to describe it though. We run the entire formula start to finish to look for anomalies, right? And if we see an anomaly, the sizing metric is locked in. That's not impacted whatsoever. So 95% locked. It's where the 5% funding for the performance and stability fund revenues, you would go back if, let's say hypothetically, the anomaly happened to a rural transit agency. We would go back just for that rural cohort, and that performance and stability fund for the rural cohort would make a tweak before doing any of the performance rewards. We would make that tweak first and then just run the formula again, like in full. So what happens is in the first run of it, there's performance funding for various agencies. In the revised second run of it, the amount of performance reward for each target hit goes down slightly for each agency because we're providing the stability funding. So it diminishes slightly the amount of funding per target hit per agency and performance, because it's kind of like, I hate to use the term off the top, but we're kind of going back into the performance and stability fund, making the correction for the anomaly, and then just running it back through using the same numbers.
So if it was 500,000, that comes out and goes to agency A that had the anomaly. And the amount of performance money left is applied to all agencies in that cohort based on which targets prorata to their sizing ratio.
Correct.
Well,
So if there's no cap on how much of the fund would go to stability, if it was needed, I mean, how would we determine, like, can you talk about that a little bit? If there was an anomaly?
Yeah, if there's an anomaly, I mean, some of it's kind of dependent on circumstances. And yeah, I mean, this is something that we've been kind of thinking through is like, how we're obviously, if there is an anomaly and we are all in agreement that we need to provide stability funding, the ultimate question is how much. And so, I've been thinking about this as like each agency is going to have an up-down percentage from the year before.
Right.
And one option, I don't know if this is a good option, is like this anomaly agency would likely be like the 20% or the 10% down year over year, the biggest one in their cohort. You could just bring them up to the next highest. So like, let's say rural cohort, you have an anomaly agency, they are 20% decline from the previous year. The next agency that fell was say 9% decline year over year. You could just bring them up to the next one that didn't have an anomaly. You could do that. There are a few different ways to slice it. I mean, I think we've kind of left it open.
Yeah. Go, Zach.
Well, we were just thinking that to handle the large scale thing, we do have ways already in place for that.
Correct.
Yeah, the one-off, we can shift money from other places if we have a economic distress in the state. We have a reserve fund as well, just, if we need that for types of things, but, something a little large scale.
It's like the magnitude might depend where the stability money came from. If it was small in the formula, maybe it comes out of here. If there is this major disaster, a hurricane comes through and it's going to be really expensive, that might be more prudent for the state to tap into that fund over there. So it doesn't wipe out that fund. So that's why this is trying to keep this very much at the policy level, because there's a lot of different considerations of as these things happen, making sure that we've thought about what it is, what the recommendation is. I think operationally, when we put this out, is like if we're proposing to use this money, that will come out there when we put out the draft SIP, because we're having these allocations. These are what they are. By the way, as part of that draft SIP says we're planning to use X $1,000 million to shore up this for this reason and from this fund. So it's very, very transparent and clear. So I think there's a lot of, we intentionally stayed away from putting numbers into this policy discussion here because there's so many things. This best judgment, the transparency helps you keep us all honest. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that was actually, I would say, like, yes, to the point, we do every year budget and we have an emergency reserve fund if something catastrophic comes up to somebody, right? So yes, we would not intend that this would use up all of the performance fund and there'd be no performance fund, right? The other thing, I think the word that does a lot of work in the policy piece is if there's a significant, we'll get there and I'll have it right in front of me, right? So if there's a significant anomalies. So again, the stability fund is not to say, oh, no one will ever get less money than they got the year before. That's not what this is about. It really is if there's something significant that's happened that is not being captured adequately within the formula. With the caveat, I also want to say, if your locality decides they're going to pull back their funding for your transit and then you have to cut service or this or the other, this is not funding for the state to come in to make up for localities not taking responsibility to fund transit. This is, we know sometimes things happen that are outside of our control, and we've noted some of these. I mean, you could say the labor agreement is within your control, but there's reasons. Healthcare costs are increasing, other things might be happening. And so this is to sort of provide some of that. If it's not already being covered in the formula, which as Grant showed in running the analyses, and this is something we talk a lot about, like, let's see it, let's make sure we're not, jumping to ill-informed conclusions. So we really did run the analysis to see how often and at what scale we think this would be, so. Now that I've said that, I'm probably like jinxing us that like something crazy will happen.
I think that conversation is helpful because anomaly for me is like, it's one system, it's two system. It's not the catastrophic emergency where we're going to go into the emergency fund. But I did want to think through walking me through the formula, because I know I was consciously thinking for incentivizing better performance, we go above the 30%. I did not, in my mind, I wanted to talk that through, think that the stability fund was going to take somebody over.
But that's where I would assume, like, they're having a
So it
problem.
couldn't, so I wanted
it
to make
would-
sure.
Yeah, the whole reason they're coming is because they're in the
Yeah.
deficit.
And so like when you were saying, well, there should be a threshold, they don't take all the money, maybe it takes them to a percentage. That's where in my mind it kind of clicked. Well, then we need to get the anomaly corrects them to the 30% or a reasonable down. Some of the other stuff was 5 or 10% up and down kind of thing.
Stay
I
away
just
from
wanted to be
numbers.
intentionally talk about the fact that the stability fund is capped at 30%, but the performance
I would
incentive.
certainly never give anyone stability funding that gets them over 30%.
So I would like to be very conscious about that statement.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the way, to Maria's point, I think the way that the math would shake out, I don't think that would even be possible, but certainly
For transparency and 5 years from now, when we're all not in this room, somebody will remember that.
How long have you been in this room?
2013.
I guess we arrived at that because we've just seen so many ways, it could be the way that the place accounts for their stuff, to throw something into it. It could be a local thing. It's just putting a number on it. It's just so difficult because again,
Yes.
all the various amounts of agencies.
we have seen,
Goals,
because
things.
cost is in here, like ridership hours and miles are pretty straightforward. Cost is where you see some real, I mean, I'm not saying that we see this often, because again, we don't see this often. But to Zach's point, we've seen an instance where an agency did their audited financials and they booked a pretty big expense in the wrong year. And so there was an audited correction. And I can't remember if they went up or they went down in one year and then came back down to it all balanced themselves out. But these are the things that we would have to talk to agencies about. It's like, why did your costs go up or down significantly in this year? And if it's just going to even itself out, it's like, okay, it's going to even itself. So.
One of the things that seems peculiar to me is that we lump all of this together as stability and performance. And I wonder if there isn't a better way to conceptualize this, maybe in terms of a really keeping performance clean and talking about, and then having a small stability account that's there. Maybe something that, you retain for 3 years, and then at the end of 3 years, you throw the first year back into performance. Something along those lines. If you haven't had to use it for stability purposes.
Or maybe we could think about, again, we haven't talked this through, so I appreciate the brainstorm. Maybe there's a way we could say up to some percentage could be made available. If not needed, it would flow. So you're not holding
Yes,
it
that's
for
right.
years, but that year,
Yep.
if you needed it that year, we've got up to this percent. You don't need it that year, it just
rolls
flows
in,
into the
right,
full
to the next year.
performance. Yeah.
think that's a goal because we're intentionally trying to get as much money as we possibly can, keep that money in the performance fund. The stability is if we're needing it, hopefully we're not needing it, but that's a good, I think a good little bit of a safety valve, a little bit of an off ramp for codifying that maybe in policy.
No, I like what the director is talking to, because especially if we're looking at a couple lean years.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Putting, so if it's held, but if not used, it rolls back in. I think it's a nice.
I don't like sitting on money.
No,
I
no,
like
no,
getting it
no,
out the
no,
door.
absolutely not, right.
There is one other thought on that too, though, which is that by keeping it all together in one pot, you make use of that money in a given year. So if it's not needed, stability means then the funds are available to help
Yeah.
everybody out.
Yep.
So do you want that money to be rolling from year to year unspent, or do you just want to draw what you need off of performance and use the rest of it if possible, rather than let it sit there?
Mhm, mhm.
Something. to think
Well, I
about.
mean, yeah, I mean, it could even be just for that first year, you're setting aside a little bit extra, and then every year after that, you're rolling the money back in. But yeah, the thing that kind of gnaws at me a little bit is just the idea of lumping the two together.
Yeah.
As-
Like the optics, the
Yeah.
labeling, yeah.
I mean, I've honestly, I've done this presentation so many times, like describing sorry, I'm going back a little bit here. Just agreed, this performance and stability allocations, it would be way cleaner if it was just base sizing, performance over here. We have this other pot of money that we very rarely use, which has all these different stability considerations. But I think from an optics perspective, getting rid of stability from the performance and stability fund is definitely easier to explain.
Okay.
You would have to figure out a way to still incorporate, we still have
We still have the
Stability.
policy.
Mhm.
We still have a policy for us to fall back on
Mhm.
if something happens, but it doesn't have to be there because there's no guarantee that A, we're gonna need it, or B, you would ever have to allocate. So I think we can play with the story and how we visualize this.
And this is if we just sort of go back to what you have, I think it's slide 36. You already have the DRPT director discretion. And so that kind of,
Mhm.
in any given year, your DRPT director has the discretion with obviously identifying and providing recommendations. So that's how you do stability. It's over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because we
The
went back
funding
to
for
the
that would
slide.
come from here.
Okay.
It's kind of the opposite way. It's rather than whether it's left over, it's the only if and only if. It would come from this, not from your formula. Don't freak out.
Right,
Right.
And like you said, John, having it together, those metrics don't apply to stability. So it also is not
All right, yeah,
a clean message.
this is good.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hey,
Looks good.
well, we still have more slides, but they're all just kind of recapping all of the recommendations that we've brought. So I can just kind of get us started here. This is dating back to, gosh, when did we first meet? January, February?
February.
March, I don't know when it was. But we solidified our recommendations for capital. So just as a reminder, we added new subcategories in the capital program and developed new scoring methodologies for major enhancement. So large SGR projects, these are projects over $3 million. I'll say this is one that we're really just cleaning up in policy, something that we were already doing. No big change here. Removing the 5 vehicle or 5% fleet threshold for major projects and scoring all vehicle expansion projects as minor enhancements. Same thing, we're already doing this. We weren't able to actually achieve this as the policy is written. So we're just basically formalizing something that we're already doing here. And then it would be the change, of the 3 capital recommendations would be removing underutilized incentive categories. You might recall those that we talked about, and replacing them with good grants management incentive categories to keep these grants moving faster through our capital program. For merit operating, just rewind a few meetings here. recommendations were defining the cohorts, so rural, small, urban, and large, to be revisited every 3 years, or following a decennial census, whichever comes first. Then it was dividing the total amount of merit operating revenues after the 5% off the top is taken off. To 7% of the revenues would go to rural, 12% to small urban, 81% to large urban. We would review these percentages at least every 3 years. Use a 3-year average data set. This is 2A of operating costs, miles, hours, and ridership and the sizing metric for stability purposes. Sizing metric weights for rural, and I won't read these. The next 3 are pretty straightforward. The weights for sizing metric weights for rural, small urban, and large urban are 2B, 2C, and 2D. Did that the last meeting. 3A was, now we're going to the Performance and Stability Fund. So cohorting the Performance and Stability Fund, possibly to be renamed the Performance Fund. So using those same percentages, 81, 12% small, 7% rural, allowing agencies who hit their 30% cap in sizing to be eligible for performance funding. And then the ones that we talked about here today, utilizing cost per hour, cost per mile, cost per passenger as the performance metrics for rural, that 60th percentile target. Won't go through each one individually, but we list out the small urban metrics, the large urban metrics, those 60th percentile targets. And then the last 2 that we just talked about was setting those performance targets in policy to be reviewed by TSDAC and DRPT at least every 3 years. And then also hitting on how we would structure the stability funding and the considerations for that. So those are all of the merit operating recommendations. And then for TRIP, Evan covered these earlier, but just to hit on them again, expanding eligibility of the TRIP programs to all local governments, providing definitions and program guidance for activity, zero fare, zero and reduced fare, specifically for zero and reduced fare, requesting to consider ongoing support for system-wide zero fare efforts. That's kind of put on ice for now. Enhanced mobility innovation, so doing the definitions and program guidance there. And then retaining eligible project types for passenger amenities. So those, we're kind of throwing it all out there. These are all the recommendations that we have now brought forward to you all. And so that kind of leads us into where do we go from here? So we have the July 7th meeting on the calendar. I think now we are really in crunch time. And this is where we have to really do our due diligence in terms of getting final feedback for consideration that we want to summarize to you all. So the action item for our TSDAC members is to meet with transit agencies, partners, stakeholders who you represent to get feedback of what was discussed at today's meeting and prepare to make final policy recommendations on the operating and TRIP programs at the July meeting. So that's really your charge. And then on the DRPT side, we are committing to doing one final virtual stakeholders workshop prior to the next TSDAC meeting to solicit feedback on all of our recommendations. So we're going to do one virtual workshop. We haven't identified the specific date just yet. It will very likely be either the last week of June or the second to last week of June. So that would be in 2 weeks or in 3 weeks, right around there. And we do need to satisfy our public comment requirement. So at the next TSDAC meeting in July, we thought it would be appropriate to have that public comment period when we're bringing, all of these recommendations to you. And also, reminder that in public comment, we have to limit time to 3 minutes per speaker just to get through all the public comments. We just want to throw that out. So that's whoop.
Yeah, not that slide
Oh,
yet,
not yet.
because Sydney's gonna raise her hand
Okay.
before, sorry. If I could go back to, before you leave that slide, just
Yeah.
a plug for the DRPT website and the online comments, because people can do comments now. But if you could go back to slide 40 for me, and then this will kind of tee into some of our homework and next steps before those stakeholders, 40.
Or
So the 2B, C, and D motions here are marked as check marks.
Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of refresh us because we didn't have the minutes. I think we approved that with the purposes of DRPT continuing their analysis, but we haven't officially adopted it. So I just wanted to confirm that because for me, part of the next steps would be seeing the tool that you all have updated that had this in there and now the performance measurements in there and seeing that data and kind of do some analysis way before the July meeting and your stakeholder meeting. So I kind of wanted to flag that official vote, I think will come back when we do the whole thing. But then what's the tools and the additional data we'll have between now and the July meeting?
So if I could, Mr. Chair, the team is working on finalizing the tool that we've been using in the background, preparing all of this. And probably within, maybe by the end of the week, early next week, we will have that ready to go to send out to you all to play with. It'll be the same type of setup that has assumptions that you will put in for the different sections, and then you can play with the different criteria that we recommended on here and the different targets to see kind of what happens with it. Very much similar happens to what the tool did last time around. So we'll have that out to you all. Make sure you all can use that. And obviously, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us so we can walk you through it. If you need us to meet outside of that larger meeting that we're proposing, if you need us to meet one-on-one with your agency or with your group, please let us know. We'll see if we can work that in and to help walk you through and answer any questions so folks understand what's happening and the mechanics of how it happens.
That'll be very helpful. That tool was helpful on the previous iteration. And when you send it to us, of course, it will be public. So that means we could share with those that we represent. Would it also be on the website?
We gotta make sure we can lock it down because there are certain
Yeah.
things we need to lock down, but we'll see what we can do about the one side as well.
And it still may generate questions when people don't totally understand this piece, but this feels transparent and people
we'll say that.
be ready for that stakeholder group.
Very open to doing one-on-one meetings with agencies. We had 2 maybe last week. Those one-on-ones do seem to be very helpful because they can ask very direct, pointed questions to us, and we can kind of walk them through the numbers so that they can feel more comfortable.
It also gets back to Paula's point earlier, making sure the other small urbans know about that added performance metric incentive. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I also just wanted to let you and others know, I will actually not be in the July meeting. I will
Where are we
be,
going?
I will be across the pond in England. My husband is teaching over at Cambridge this summer, so I will be there. It's the meeting. So that was a long planned event. So I'm sorry to miss what will probably be the most exciting of the TSDAC meetings point, but you are in good hands with team, and we will be talking a lot before that to have DRT prepped and ready, and then we'll be excited to hear how that goes as we obviously move into doing a lot of outreach in August to be ready to present to the CTB in September. So just wanted to give you
Thank you.
advanced warning and apologies for not being.
Good travels. Before we move on to any kind of closure, I just want to make sure that everybody feels like we are on the right track, that there are not unresolved major issues or even some sort of minor flags.
But, Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Dr. Smoot.
I do think we're on the right track. I have one remaining question. That is, if someone were to ask, what is the rationale for the percentage allocation of operating funds across the 3 cohort groups? What is it?
And Dr. Smoot, you're referring to the 81% for large urban, 12% for small urban, and 7% for rural?
I am.
Yes, so that brings us back all the way to, again, it was February or March, I don't know, somewhere around that time frame. We presented those recommendations with the rationale being that we looked at the numbers in many different ways. We looked at ridership across all those cohorts, hours, miles, allocation, historical allocations to those cohorts. And there seemed to be a natural gravitation roughly to those percentages. We did, and speaking with TSDAC members at that meeting, we didn't push forward with what DRPT recommended. We recommended a slightly different version. I think it was 80% for large urban, 12% for small, and 8% for rural. But after some conversation, I think we all agreed that adding a point to large and taking a point away from rural was appropriate, given the actual allocations to those area types historically. So that's generally.
I do recall that discussion, and I guess the question I have, and perhaps you just answered it, is the allocation we're now recommending approximately what has been across those cohort groups in the last several years.
Exactly. Yep.
Very
Yes,
good.
I
Thank
think
you.
data informed to be consistent with, and in alignment with historic trends for how we've allocated operating funds.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Smoot, while we, since you just finished speaking, are there any other issues that you want to highlight before we prepare for our July?
Not I.
consideration? Okay.
That's all I have.
All right, well, anybody else have anything they'd like to bring to our attention before we adjourn? If not, adjourn this meeting of TSDAC.
Thank you. Good job.
Thanks.
Get on the road a little earlier. It's good for